When we say we answer all requests at Mark Rogers TV, we answer all requests. We've taken them from Clemson and Oregon, Wisconsin, Nebraska, a number of other teams in recent months as well, all major powers in college football. Last week we received one for Washington State, and yes, we are going to meet the request for a preview and prediction on Washington State football 2013 from Twitter follower I am Eric Russell. So I'm going to let you know, this was my take on Washington State football going into the research that I did tonight. Of course, this program has been in utter chaos over the last 5 to 6 to 8 years. The last really important game I remember Washington State playing was in losing to Oklahoma in the 2002 season, 2003 Rose Bowl. Since then, they have been abysmal and getting worse and dropping off the cliff. The issues with Mike Price, their former head coach, and having several seasons in which they lost 9-10 football games. Okay, they bring in Mike Leach, and of course, he's going to improve things by simply his mere presence and throwing the football and driving people crazy, throwing it 60 times, creating mismatches where he possibly could, and just willing this team possibly to 4 or 5 wins. That didn't happen. He stuck his foot in his mouth, as he typically does. But when he wins games, it doesn't matter. But at Washington State, he dissed his team a number of times. Not necessarily the most classy thing to do in the manner that Mike Leach did it. And this season, in my view, in my estimation, from the periphery, seemed like a disaster. They did salvage something with the Apple Cup victory over Washington, where the Huskies missed an extra point, and Washington State salvaged that game to finish at 3-9 and win their only conference game in the Pac-12. My only memory of Washington State football in 2012 was surfing late at night on a Saturday night and coming across the UCLA game. I watched most of that game against the Bruins at Pullman. Washington State got buried in the first half, came back, made it a game, made it interesting by throwing the football all over the place as they typically do. And UCLA won that game 44-36. So that was my impression of Washington State football before I did some research. And as you might expect, I had to do quite a bit of research for this football preview versus the other ones that I took in. All right, Mike Leach suffered his first losing season and going in 3-9, 1-8 in the Pac-12. As always, with any Mike Leach team, it all starts at quarterback. And you've got Connor Halliday taking the control of the team. He shared duties at quarterback in 2012, but this is Halliday's team in 2013 as a junior. Last season, Halliday only completed 52% of his passes, and that is not acceptable in major college football, period, but especially in quarterbacking a Mike Leach system. You dump the ball down quite a bit. You quarterback in a very robotic way. You don't force the ball down the field. You don't force it into tight windows. You're not a gunslinger. You're not a hero. You play within the system, you check down, you go through your progressions, and you dump the football off if nobody's open downfield. 52% is going to have to be much better. Halliday was actually better as a freshman at 57%. So that is key for Washington State to run the type of offense that Mike Leach loves to run and sling it 50 times a game. 15 touchdowns for Halliday against 13 picks, and we mentioned the UCLA effort when he had 330 yards passing and 5 TDs against the Pac-12 South champions. Okay, at wide receiver, this is really good news, and this is the theme for Washington State across the board. Players are coming back all over the place. At wide receiver, we've got all sorts of production coming back to Washington State. Now, were these guys 4- and 5-star recruits? No. But they did produce in the Pac-12. And again, they've worked a lot with Halliday, and now they're back. Let's run them down with Brett Bartolone, 54 receptions, 435 yards. You've got Gabe Marks at 49 for 560. Isaiah Myers at 41 for 418. Dominique Williams, he's the big play guy, 34 receptions for 546 yards. And Bobby Ratliff, 30 receptions and 398 yards. All those guys are back. Those were the 5 leading receivers for Washington State in 2012, and they're all coming back in 2013. Okay, the running game is a joke. Mike Leach won 7-8 football games at Texas Tech by throwing the football constantly but you don't win big, not establishing a dominant run team, a physical presence at the line of scrimmage. You can't protect leads effectively that way. You can't win the line of scrimmage and impose your will and be what football should be on offense, first and foremost, and that's physical. It's got to be physical along the line of scrimmage, and Washington State really needs to address this problem. The offensive line is atrocious. 124th in run blocking efficiency. That's a complicated statistic that takes into account when there is contact made at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. That's dead last in college football. Number 124 in run blocking efficiency. Now, they've got 4 of their top 8 offensive linemen back. I don't know if that's a good thing. That represents 63 career starts out of the offensive line. The deal here is that Mike Leach has got to recruit offensive linemen. The offensive linemen coming in as freshmen, and in his first recruiting go a season prior, they did not bring in top offensive linemen. They didn't even bring in marginal offensive linemen. You can't just go after the skill players and expect to throw the football all over the place and make it happen. And I know Mike Leach knows that, because at Texas Tech, he did have offensive linemen that were quick, that spread out the line of scrimmage, of course, and created those running lanes for the running backs, made it difficult for the pass rush to get to the quarterback because their spread and those line splits are so wide that it takes those defensive ends a long time to get to the quarterback. So we understand the scheme, know that it's exotic, and know that it's not the most physical scheme in the country, but at the same time, football's physical. You got to run the football, and this was a joke. Carl Winston, who's since departed, he was a senior, 280 yards rushing to lead the team. 3.4 yards per carry. That is atrocious, even in the NFL. In major college football, 3.4 yards per carry is a joke. Teandre Caldwell comes back. He's the leading rusher, coming back at 269 and 4.8 per carry. This team threw it over 72% of the time, I believe, were the statistics there. So you've got to run the football. I know Mike Leach is always going to be a pass guy, and he's got a pass-happy system, but he's got to balance it out more than that. All right. Actually, this team, my impression, again, before I looked at the numbers and really looked at the game log, game by game, was that they got blown out across the board. I think the thing that skewed it for me was that lost to Colorado 35-34. They blew a big lead, lost by 1 point to one of the worst teams in major college football, the Buffs. And the Buffs got blown out by like 40, 50 points the rest of the season. So my impression was Washington State is horrible, horrible. And of course, they lost football games. But if you look at the UCLA effort, which we mentioned, also Oregon State and the Stanford game, a 24-17 effort, Washington State stayed in some games, mostly because of defense. This is the ironic thing. Mike Leach comes in, and the offense is just as bad as it had been, probably worse, actually, with Halliday just completing 52% of his passes. And we know he shared time with Toole at quarterback. But they just didn't generate much on offense. Despite throwing the ball so much for a lot of yardage, they didn't score points. The defense was pretty darn good, and it could get better in 2013. 5 of 6 of the most productive defensive linemen are back. 7 of 8 linebackers and 6 of 7 defensive backs. We're talking about the most productive players in regards to playing time and starts and tackles for loss and sacks and picks. On the stat sheet, that is 5 of 6 at the line, 7 of 8 linebackers, 6 of 7 defensive backs are back in 2013. And the scheme here is basically to come from all angles, blitz the quarterback, blitz in the backfield, make big plays happen. Now you're going to get burned a ton, but when you don't have the talent to match up, you try to make big plays and make things happen. They're going to continue to do that. They come from all angles. Okay, the best guys along the defensive front, Xavier Cooper and Ioane Gauta, both had 8.5 tackles for loss. Your top linebacker is Darryl Moore, who also had 8.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. And the one legitimate star in this football team that is one of the top defensive backs in the country is Deone Bucannon, who had 85 stops for 4 picks as well, 3.5 tackles for loss for Deone Bucannon. So he's a guy that you need to watch who's got a chance to play on Sundays. Okay, we looked at the schedule. Of course, the Pac-12 plays everybody, actually plays 9 of 12 now within the conference. Used to play everybody before adding the Utah and Colorado to make it the Pac-12. So you got 9 conference games. We expect Washington State to improve, to get better because of all this production coming back. Really, the offensive line is the huge question and is really deplorable, and the running game with the running backs included. So we expect Washington State to go 2-1 out of conference. Can't expect the Cougars to go to Auburn and have much of a chance, despite Auburn going 0-8 in the SEC last season. We know that Auburn's got superior talent. They will improve tremendously this year. Okay, so we got Washington State throwing up another 3-9 campaign, but this program could be better. It could pass Utah and Colorado and could pass a few other programs in the Pac-12 in the near future. Let's see if Mike Leach keeps his mouth in check, can bring in some recruits, not just at the skill positions, but at offensive line, and continue what has been started on defense. Because again, if you check out the performance by the defense last season against some of the better teams in the Pac-12, Washington State stacked up pretty well. That's my take on the Washington State Cougars. I learned a lot. Thank you. I am Eric Russell. We appreciate the suggestion and the request to do some Washington State football. Would love to hear what you have to say about Washington State, the Pac-12, college football in general, right here on Mark Rogers TV.